On today's episode, we'll talk about the U.S.'s long history of arming awful people, dissect a post from someone who doesn't know the difference between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, analyze a poster who thinks Afghanistan is the only oppressive third world country in the world, and discuss how, if you voted for Biden, Afghanistan is your fault. This is Cringe Post. Hey friends, welcome to the show. This is the Cringe Post podcast where we take on the online takes that make you cringe. My name's Britt.
And I'm Donald.
And we're going to take on some stuff with the current situation that's going on in Afghanistan. And you don't normally say before we do that, we're going to take a look at some cringe takes, but we are going to take a look at some cringe takes of our own Donald on Afghanistan, so it's kind of all relates together. So back in 2012, Donald wrote, "Who is Biden to blame Ryan for bad voting? Biden has made every wrong choice in foreign policy. Look up Krauthammer on it." And of course, you're talking about an article where Krauthammer criticized Biden's voting record on saying that the war in Iraq was a mistake, correct?
Yeah, so, I mean, the Krauthammer article specifically outlines every single vote and position he's had. And what's interesting is that over the years, I think everything that Krauthammer, pretty much everything that he criticizes him for, was actually the correct position to be on.
Yeah.
And what's wild is I'd heard something about how some of the change that Biden had from flipping from being sort of bad on war, because I think I don't remember, but I think he did vote for the first one. Iraq war. I don't remember exactly what it is, or maybe he might have voted for Afghanistan or something like that.
He voted for both of them. But he's one of the few guys. He did it pretty early. I think it was 2005. He said, "Hey, it was a mistake for us to go to Iraq."
And one of the things I heard about that was because of the repercussions of what happened to, I believe, Bo, his son, who had cancer, and the radiation came from him going over there. And so it's interesting that that's what actually has this flip. And what's funny about it to me is that it's like my cringe take here is that it's like, oh, bad voting? Well, here's TV pundit to say that they're bad votes. And you look at the segment that I'm referring to, because you can Google Krauthammer Joe Biden foreign policy and it will come up. And it's like, literally all Krauthammer does is he asserts that these are bad votes. He doesn't tell you why they're bad votes. So he's like, he was against the surge. Well, everyone likes the surge, so that means it must have been a good thing, right? It's not like the surge happened, we went over there, they all went into hiding, and then we withdrew the surge, and they just came right back. It's like these people have it's just like short-term memory loss, and it's like, well, he voted against wars. He voted not to support these things, so they were bad votes. And I'm like, yeah, this Krauthammer guy said so. I don't even think I read Krauthammer at the time.
What's funny, and we've talked about it before, but the cancel culture of the 2000 to 2012s was, if you don't support the troops or you don't support us doing these endless wars in Middle Eastern countries, you're a terrible bad person, right? And this is neocon Donnie, or maybe you're starting to come out of it then. I'm not sure. 2012.
I was still neocon then. I was imminent on my transformation. I think after Romney lost is when I really started reevaluating things. I think so.
We are all better for it.
Yeah, I can tell you I'm better for it for sure.
All right, we're going to move on.
Last thing before we move on, I do want to point out it does say Twitter for Windows Phone. So there's that Windows Phone reference. That there's another date for you.
I remember the Kimball brothers loved their Windows phones.
Still do. Wish was still here, man.
Yep. All right, moving on to our first, not one of our cringes. This is one I was seeing going around. Multiple different formats, but it's, for those of you that are listening, it's a picture of a guy, I think it's a Taliban fighter, and he's with a Black Hawk helicopter, and it's titled, "The Taliban are now in possession of more Black Hawk helicopters than 166 other nations around the globe." And initially I was like, okay, that's true, right? And the thing about about the wars, right, and how that it's military industrial complex propaganda that gets us in them and keeps us there, is that there's never a humanitarian crisis when we are there blowing stuff up and the missiles and money are flowing to Lockheed Martin and they're happy and selling us billion-dollar airplanes that don't actually fly. But the second we need to pull out It's like a big humanitarian crisis. Oh my gosh, we shouldn't leave any of our stuff there. And I was thinking about, that I think it was in 2016 or whatever, the Operation Timber Sycamore thing came out with the Obama administration, where it turned out that 90% of the ISIS weapons that were being used in Iraq were weapons that we had sold to them in Syria, right? So no one ever cares. No one ever cares about the weapons being sold to these terrorists when we're at war and the money's flowing to the military industrial people. But the second we pull out and that honeypot is done, now it's a big issue, right? And, Lockheed Martin would love for the other 166 other countries to buy Black Hawk helicopters. This is like an ad for them.
Well, I joked that maybe we could get the military-industrial complex to be big supporters of Second Amendment rights if we told them that there was a market for recreational nukes, and we're just willing to buy. Maybe we can turn that a little good there. But it is funny because at best, when you arm these groups, you end up with a situation in Afghanistan where they don't turn on you, but they just run and they abandon everything. It's like this government and this fighting force that for 20 years, for millions of dollars every day, for 20 years, we're spending to train this force, to provide them equipment. And the best case scenario is they don't use it against us themselves. They run away and they disperse. And then worst case is, like ISIS grabbing them, saying, "Great, thanks for this," and then turning it right back on us. And in both cases, the weapons do get turned on us because now the Taliban has it, and whether or not they're going to actively target the U.S. is another matter. But I'm not for arming the Taliban, as I'm not for arming ISIS. They're not great people, but that also, it's just like. Not to be so meta with memes, as I think I've done this multiple episodes, but it just makes me think of that meme with the guy riding the bike and he sticks the stick from in his spokes, falls down, and then he's like, darn, whatever, other thing. And it's the US arming a military group and then tripping, darn ISIS, or we shouldn't have left, Afghanistan.
And it goes back, a lot of people think that history of the war on terror or the wars in the Middle East began in 2001 on 9/11. Mm-hmm. But really it's the first time, not even the first time, it goes all the way back to the 1950s when we installed the Shah in Iran, right? And we did that, and then we're like, oh crap, he's been ousted and all these issues. And so, okay, we're going to arm Osama bin Laden in 1979 and have him teach him guerrilla warfare, the guerrilla warfare that was going to be used on us later, to draw on the Soviet Union so that we could give them their own Vietnam. And people don't realize that, right? It's all the tactics. The reason these guys, some of them are so good at beating us in their own countries is because we train them to do that, right?
Right.
And that's never a problem though until we have to pull out. Then once we pull out, it's we left these things. Obviously, you and I don't want evil people to have weapons of mass destruction or helicopters or anything like that. Just like I don't want people having to jump from planes, to get out of the country. But it's where was all this concern, when literally hundreds of thousands of people were dying every day? Where was all this concern when Madeleine Albright, in the 90s was oh, it's okay. We starved 500,000 Iraqi children and we think it was worth it.
Yeah.
There's none of that humanitarian concern, at that point. But yeah, I think this was cringe to me because it just spoke to the depths of the propaganda that is mobilized. And I think probably a lot of it's probably the public school too, right? We're kind of taught America's a force for good, and we go to these desert countries and we give them freedom from their lives apparently because we just kill them all and starve them. But it's I just saw this going around and I had to put it up here.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on the specifically on the withdrawal front that we're talking about is I think the most common objection. I think a lot of people who are they're not hawkish. Zealots necessarily, but they're just hawkish because of what they're being told on the news and whatever. It's of course I want us to be safe, and of course I don't want terrorists to have these things. And I think the position I'd heard before all this was sort of well, yeah, we probably shouldn't have gone in, but now we can't just get up and leave like this, because, or else this current situation will happen. They have these helicopters, but the funny thing is it's especially on the conservative side, these people also would probably acknowledge that we're spending ourselves into a conundrum, and We're punting it by printing more money. We're punting it by bailing out big corporations, and all the debt and the deficit, and all this is a big mounting problem. And they're like, they probably can understand that when that comes to terms, it's better to rip the Band-Aid off, and it's going to be a hard time. And it's not going to be pleasant, but you can't keep this going in perpetuity. But when it comes to foreign policy, they don't quite get there. They're like, well, we can't leave now. And it's like, don't you realize if if you hadn't given that excuse in 2014, 2011, 2001, this would be so much less painful. But now, not only has it been 20 years, millions and billions of dollars wasted and lives wasted, but it also wouldn't have had the scale of repercussion that it does now by pulling out. So
yeah, that's a great point.
We live in a fallen, imperfect world where sometimes the choices are two bad choices, and it's like, okay, we got ourselves in this mess. Let's weigh the options, and it's not like you have perfect happy, we stay there and build everything up and rainbows and unicorns happen, or we pull out and there's devastation. It's like, no, we pull out and there's some mild chaos and a bad situation, and some bad people get, to absorb that vacuum of power, or we stay there, waste millions of dollars, waste millions of lives, and create an even bigger vacuum for those people to fill later.
Yep. That's a great point. All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a Twitter thread here. So user one, they're not a checkmark, so we won't say their name, but they tweet out, U.S. government needs to stop interfering in other countries' internal affairs once and for all. When are they going to learn a lesson? Libya, Yemen, Afghanistan, and their next victim, Ethiopia. But Ethiopians will never let it happen. Hashtag hands off Ethiopia. And I think this is kind of an Ethiopian guy that's saying it. And then someone from America responded, yes, America should not fight back against a terrorist group that wants to destroy them.
Evergreen.
Classic.
I think the thing that you and I were laughing about just on face value is, this is obviously in reference to Afghanistan. The first tweet was a reply to stuff on Afghanistan, the withdrawal there, and the Taliban inheriting power. And it's like, this guy's like, yeah, America shouldn't fight back against a terrorist group that wants to destroy them. And well, the Taliban, they weren't trying to destroy America. They've never even put out any propaganda piece. There have been groups, like terrorist groups like ISIS or even Al-Qaeda, that have said things like, we want to destroy the West. The Taliban is not one of those groups.
Do you remember in the primary debates for the Democratic Party when I can't remember I think it was like Tim I can't remember his name, but he was like, he was arguing with Tulsi Gabbard.
Oh, Tim Ryan.
Actually has been. Tim Ryan, yeah. Tim Ryan was like, oh, the Taliban attacked us. And Tulsi's like, the Taliban didn't attack us. It was Al-Qaeda. And it's just like, dude, like, that was embarrassing. Well, and I think a lot of Americans don't know that.
Yeah,
right?
Well, I was going to say, it's embarrassing because that's what we're fed. And the fact that this guy's running for president and doesn't know the basic, distinguishing groups that have and haven't attacked us shows this groupthink on us versus them.
Yeah, let's just, even if we give this person some grace, right? Like, let's just assume they're really talking about Al-Qaeda. Like, it's like, you have to think about who started this first and look at it from different perspectives. Like let's just say, hypothetically, Mexico came to the U.S., set up a bunch of military bases, decided what we could or could not export and what the price of that oil export was. And then they simultaneously, starved 500,000 children in our country. And then, they bombed, a UN hospital and, killed 100 kids and women and children. I'm pretty sure we'd have some pretty crazy people in America that would go down to Mexico and do something bad, right? Because they're fighting against it. And the reality is like, we did that to the Middle East, right? The blowback theory that Ron Paul had was absolutely 100% correct. And for a lot of these people, though, right, this history of our wars in the Middle East starts on 9/11. But in reality, for the people that are there, like, it started long before that, right? Their fathers and mothers and brothers and sisters were being killed by U.S. bombs and being starved by U.S. sanctions long before that, right? That's what led up to that. And so, yeah, like, to your point, like, I don't want anyone I don't encourage any sort of violence, right? I think violence is awful and that's terrible. But the very point that this person's trying to make, that, America should fight back, like, we should fight back against terrorists that are trying to attack us. It's like, well, they see that the exact same way. It's the same exact perspective, right? And we started it. We did it first.
Yeah. And of course, I don't think you would say that that's any sort of moral justification for any of these actions. Not. But it's also just, I mean, on so many different levels. From a moral level, it does sort of make you wonder, like, oh my goodness, like, I'm not this shining knight in glowing armor to come, rescue the world. I really, the U.S. really has made some muck-ups, so we need to consider all of our actions carefully. And two, from a practical utilitarian standpoint, it's just not worth engaging in and going over there and blowing up innocent civilians, because you just create a future generation of radicalized people who understandably hate America. And so the other thing to think about too is, it's like when we go over in different areas, again, like, this guy's really mixing up his groups, but it's like, if we go over to try to take on the Taliban and we occupy Afghanistan for 20 years, we're spending millions of dollars every day, and the moment we withdraw, they completely fill that vacuum again. Well, goodness, doesn't that cue you in that maybe maybe us fighting back against a terrorist group like that isn't effective, and at the very least, we should change strategies rather than trying to, and of course, maybe that's giving him too much credit, because the tweet to which he's replying is very specific about, interfering with their internal affairs. It's not even like needs to stop fighting terrorists. It's like, don't go in there and mess up their internal systems, which I think is a super reasonable request.
So I don't know much about the Ethiopia deal. Are we eyeing that right now? I don't think that was on like that list of 7 countries or whatever. Maybe it was.
I haven't heard that. I don't know if that's just sort of the talk, but I mean, like, let's be real. It's not like we haven't invaded African countries before. I mean, look at Libya, and that whole region's probably got to be nervous. So I don't know if he's saying their next victim Ethiopia because of anything informed, or if he's just sort of postulating. But regardless, I mean, heck, I don't blame him for being worried.
Yeah, everyone should be concerned.
Yeah.
Cool. Moving on to our next one. We have another Twitter thread. This first person says, allies have failed the Afghan people. So many people are going to lose their lives and become oppressed, all because politicians wanted to score some brownie points. Unreal, tragic. And then this person number 2 replies, so we should spend trillions of dollars to prop up a government indefinitely? Why not also go to Africa and spend trillions to prop up governments there, like in Yemen and Somalia, ...
Which is like sick burn right there.
Yeah, which we're doing. And then the original person, who's the cringe person, says, I think American investment in Africa is a little too late. China and France kind of lead the world in that. But we aren't talking about Africa. We are talking about one nation that has historically been oppressed and abused. By us.
Yeah, I know. Well, what I found horrifying is, it's like, this person's first tweet, the allies have failed. They're losing lives and become oppressed because politicians want to score brownie points. That alone was a cringe post I was ready to just take. And then I saw the replies, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it gets even worse. So I want to first respond to this first tweet, which allies have failed the Afghan people. No, we failed them when we invaded their country in the first place. The people that we've supported to prop up this government in Afghanistan, right? Those people were not good people. And I don't know if people don't realize this, but like, people will talk about how terrible the Taliban are, but the people that we were supporting were not angels either. They talk about, women losing their rights from the Taliban, and that's terrible stuff. I agree. And, raping of women and little girls. And then you realize the people we propped up were raping little boys. Like, these aren't good people. I mean, I've heard testimonies from soldiers who've come back from that, and they were messed up because they were like, the people that I'm supporting, the people I'm propping up here, I know are doing these horrible things, and I'm helping them do it. So it's like, so many people are going to lose their lives and become oppressed. They already were oppressed. Whether or not you think the government, the U.S. government going in there was oppressing them, the people we were propping up were oppressing them regardless. So the Taliban coming in, it's like, there might be some different kinds of oppression, and maybe it will be worse. I'm not saying it won't be for sure, but to ignore the reality of that situation is bizarre. Because the politicians want to score brownie points. Yeah, this was a really popular political move that Biden is basking in all the glory for right now. Yeah, that's a brilliant take, sir. Like, this is obviously just for brownie points, because he's definitely getting those. What is this guy smoking?
I think I saw like the approval rating. I think this is the first time that Biden has dipped below 50% in the approval ratings.
Which is like, of course, the time he does something right. It's kind of like how when Trump early in his presidency dropped that bomb, and then all the media was like, "Wow, he's finally
Real
presidential."
leadership.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, the other part that's kind of funny, you know, is like this cringe person kind of pivots to like the investment in Africa, and I think about like people feel really threatened by like the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, right, where they're going around investing in the infrastructure, loaning money to these countries. And it's like, if you feel so threatened by it, like, why aren't we doing that, right? Like, I'd way rather have like investment in these countries and money poured into these countries, and I'm sure they would rather that too. And that's how we take power. Like, that's actually a good like thing, right? It's mutually beneficial. They need money. We have capital to give. They need stuff built. We want them to build it, and we want to have access to it. You know, obviously, you and I are very much like, we'd rather that be private versus government. But it's like, I think it would be way better to export prosperity than bombs.
Right.
And yeah, it's just crazy. It's like, okay, you've got a good point. Like China and France, I don't really know about France's investment in Africa, you know, in the modern day, but like, yeah, they're investing in it. Like, it's not too late for us to go get over there and do that either. Like, we should be doing stuff like that. Not obviously, like I'm saying, you and I are not for government stuff, but like, it's obviously way better than initiating war over.
Yeah, well, and it's, you know, the for one thing, it's like, if you don't believe that private investment does things like that, they do, and they currently are. Like, there are companies that are propping up renewable solar-powered water systems in Africa, things like that, where they can go in, they can provide this equipment for people, and then train the people there to upkeep and use and stuff like that, which I think is a good kind of investment in that. But what's funny is it's the guy bringing up that investment in that way is almost a non sequitur to whom he's replying, because the second tweet is talking about propping up governments and spending trillions to prop up governments. And this guy's like, I think American investment in Africa is too little too late. And it's like, he's okay with this idea of like propping up governments. It sounds like it's like, he's like, oh, well, you know, I'd love to do that, but it sounds like there's already too much economic development going on from China and France. Otherwise, we totally would. It's like he totally misses the lessons of Afghanistan here. And then we're talking about one nation that, you know, he's like, we're not talking about Africa. We're talking about one nation that has historically been oppressed and abused. And it's like, how blind are you? We're not talking about Africa. Look at the examples he gives you of like Yemen, Somalia. Think of Libya. Think of all these other countries where we've gone in and had disaster. And he's like, no, Afghanistan's different though, because there was oppression there. It's like, oh yeah, of course, I forgot how great these other places
think
were.
Think about the Congo and Uganda.
Like those places definitely had no oppression. So you're right. These are different scenarios. I mean, this is what I love to categorize as confidently wrong. Someone who absolutely knows nothing about the history or even the current affairs of U.S. foreign policy and just speaks so boldly and just so purely wrong about something. It's wild.
Yeah, I remember, I can't remember the article. I'll find it at some point. But like there was this Afghani that was responsible for like making the requests for budgets for the government and all that stuff. And what he would do is he'd add an extra zero to his request, and then he would just pocket the difference that they didn't use, right? So it's like whenever there's government involved, I mean, we already see this back here, right? But like whenever there's government involved, capital is not distributed efficiently, much less if you're going to like put it over into some third world country that's war torn right now with a bunch of warlords and greedy people that, you know, are going to try and impress their own people. There's no way that capital can be distributed effectively. But of course, this person thinks it's a good idea, you know, regardless. Like you were saying, he blows right past the point of investment.
Yeah. So I don't know this one. And the thing is, like, I understand. Again, I sympathize with people who don't know the context and they're being kind of fed this idea that we need to, you know, be strong abroad to be safe at home, just because they don't have time to look into this stuff. But to speak so specifically and confidently about this and being so, you know, argumentative about something where you have no idea what you're talking about, that's what shocks me. Like, I don't want to turn off people who just sort of think that we need to be, you know, think that we need to beef up the military and we need to prevent them from getting us first. Those kinds of people who aren't really doing it out of a maliciousness or anything like that. But I think sometimes people just dig in their heels and they just want to be right and they don't want to listen. And that's That's the problem. That's what this guy strikes me as. Because, like, anyone who actually knows the history of what's gone on there, at the very least, would have to have a more nuanced view than this. Like, as though Afghanistan is the one nation that's historically oppressed and abused.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Agree with you on that. Moving on to our next one. We've got a blue check mark so we can reveal their name. Michael Moore posts a picture of the Taliban in the presidential palace or whatever it's called in Kabul, and then it's right above a picture of the horn guy in the White House, or not the White House, in the Senate building, Capitol building, on the January 6th riots, or not riots but protests or whatever they're supposed to be called.
I think it's called the January 6th 9/11.
Yeah. And he writes, "Their Taliban, our Taliban, everybody's got a Taliban. They're at their best when they confiscate the halls of power." Basically, he's saying, hey, the guys that did January 6th that, were let in by the cops and walked around a bit and then left are the equivalent of these guys holding a bunch of different rifles and storming the presidential palace in Kabul. It's actually really, as stupid as this post is and as cringe it is, it's actually really scary to me, because basically he's like one step away from people like you and I saying like we're Taliban, right, in the U.S.
Yeah.
Oh, and that's it's kind of, I mean, that was, I remember back, when they were trying to do the Patriot Act and everything, and people were like, hey, like they're going to use this as a way to silence and spy on and, jail anyone that they don't like, any political dissidents. And everyone's like, "You're no way, that could never happen here in America." And it's like, no, it's here, right? Like they're already comparing people that they don't like to, terrorists in a third world country. And what they do to them, right? They put them in frickin' Gitmo for forever and play metal music and make them not able to sleep and torture them. So they think that's okay to do to them. What does that say about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not a far stretch at all. I mean, even people saying they physically, breached the Capitol, and you're still overblowing it, really? Because I think last time I checked, John Brennan included libertarians on the watch list of people for potentially, with terrorist motives for the Americans. Libertarians, like, oh my gosh.
I mean, maybe to him they're terrorists, so...
Yeah, the idea of reducing any, fraction of the FBI and CIA's power is terrorism, I suppose, to him. But, yeah, I think what's super cringy about this is it's a very unoriginal take. I mean, There's so many, like, oh, man, they're religious zealots. They're basically the right wing of America. It's like, oh, man, good one. Nice.
But I think we should clarify, you and I aren't necessarily big fans of them either. But
well, no, I think the January 6th and the Taliban, like they're both like, I mean, January 6th is so far under the Taliban in terms of serious. Like the Taliban are bad people. I don't like the Taliban. And the fact that you're bringing January 6th into it, I don't think the January 6th people were smart, but I don't think they're like even malicious. I don't even think they're on the same level as the Taliban by any stretch of the imagination. If Afghanistan withdrawal, left a vacuum of power and it was filled by the January 6th protesters, then I think Afghanistan would be fairly well off.
Yeah, where would you be more scared to be? In the presidential palace in Kabul when the Taliban's storming it, or during the the Capitol building tour of January 6th? Like,
yeah, it's such a
everyone would choose the Capitol building on January 6th.
Right. It's such a cringy thing to try to. I mean, it feels like playground. That little kid, that I don't like. He's Hitler. Just pointing at him. He's the devil. It's like, oh, this group of people who went in our capital. They're like the evil terrorists who went in Afghanistan. It's like such a cheap shot. That's just so not funny. It's just so lame. I don't know.
I mean, Michael Moore's kind of lame. So
I was going to say, Michael Moore's the one who was trying to... Wasn't he the one who was trying to defend... was it Cuba? Back before the... I feel like he stayed in a hotel somewhere, and I want to say it was Cuba, and he stayed in this hotel trying to, espouse the praises of communism. And it was terrible conditions, and they were like putting up all their country's best because they knew this was going to get American publicity, and even then it was garbage. And he was like praising how good it was. I mean, Michael Moore's credibility is not exactly a rock solid item anyway, but this is just like one of those things where like, oh, You're just throwing red meat to your base again.
Yeah, he loves it. All right, moving on from good old Mr. Moore. I think this is our last one, and it's also the shortest one. So this user tweeted, if you voted for Biden, Afghanistan is on you.
Nothing says historical context and a wealth of knowledge than you elected the most recent president who did this withdrawal. Afghanistan's on your fault then.
Your fault. And this is what's unfortunate, right? Is like I feel like these Middle Eastern wars are kind of used as a bludgeon for all their, the current people in power or whatever, and whether to hammer people in the past or to hammer what people will do in the future. God, he's going to take us out of Afghanistan. Like, we can't do that. He would open us up to another 9/11, and then it's like, well, it's actually Trump's fault. Like, he negotiated with the Taliban for a withdrawal. It's like, maybe I saw a meme the other day where it's like some people were blaming Trump, some people were blaming Biden, and then it has a picture of George Bush smiling underneath, all content and happy. Yeah. It's like, you want to blame someone, you could blame him.
Right. And I mean, I was going to say, like, even if, even if you were to say that, like, this particular withdrawal is like, on Biden, and it's like, I mean, heck, if you voted for Biden, Afghanistan's on you, well, then good. I mean, like, then you're giving them credit because this was a tough decision and a tough thing that was going to happen inevitably, and at least someone finally was able to do it. So kudos to Biden. So yeah, if you voted for Biden, then hey, this is actually one thing you can say that when I'm like, I didn't vote for Biden, they can say, well, he got us out of Afghanistan, and I'll be like, yeah, okay, you're right. That was a good thing he did, and I'm glad he did it. It's people don't understand how inevitable this withdrawal was, turmoil was going to be. The options were this turmoil now or this turmoil later after more death and money spent.
Yep. There was a guy that had a really good take on this. He normally doesn't have good takes, but he did this time. And he was saying, for the idea of having democracy become a reality or American republicanism become a reality in these Middle Eastern countries is just absurd. Yeah. On the face of it, like you think about how long it took for the Western countries to get democracy and our version of republicanism, 800 years, right? Like between the Magna Carta and the Constitution. So how much more time do you think it's going to take for us to have, build our democracy in Afghanistan? 800 years? Are we going to be in Afghanistan for 800 years? Because that's what it's going to take, right? It might even take more than that, right? Because you're fighting up against an entire religion and culture that doesn't internally value these sorts of things. They're totally different than what the Western Christian and Judeo-Christian values are, and when you put it in that perspective, it's like yeah, it's time to get out. It's like people think it's like, well, we could have just been there for another year. It's like, no, like we've been saying that for 20 years now. We could have ended Afghanistan in Christmas of 2001 when we had bin Laden cornered on the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Like we could have ended it then, and we didn't. And I think about, did you ever watch that the Wesley Clark video where he was talking about the memo he got?
I don't think so.
Dude, so you should watch it. It's crazy. But this general in 2001, 2 weeks after September 11th, he got a memo saying, hey, we're going to try and push to go invade Iraq as well after we go in Afghanistan. And he's like, what? Like, why are we going to do that? Like, we have no business being there. And then he said after bin Laden escaped and we let him escape to Pakistan in Christmas, he got another memo that said we're going to be invading 7 countries in 5 years. And those countries included Libya, Syria, all of the ones that we're currently in right now. And it's like this was baked into the cake from the very beginning. Like George W. Bush had a goal and Donald Rumsfeld had a goal. They wanted to go knock out all these different countries and they wanted to finish with Iran. And I mean, ironically, we're in every country right now but Iran in terms of like a hot war. And that's what people don't realize is like we were played for fools, right? Like, regardless of whether you buy into whatever conspiracy theory about 9/11, it's like they used it for us to get into all these countries. And that is on the American people and on the for being deceived, and then on the elites that got us into these things. So yeah, Biden is part of that. He voted for it. So and this person partially got it right. like he's part of it, but you're leaving out a whole bunch of other people.
I would say maybe make an amendment to this tweet, and it's like, if you voted for Biden for Senate, Afghanistan is on you. Then they're, oh yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I mean, just the fact that people, I mean, well, and here's the other thing. As of recording, anyway, from what I'm aware, there actually has not been that much bloodshed and strife and turmoil in Afghanistan yet from the Taliban takeover. I know of, I think maybe one leader who was being held in a prison and that they took over and they shot and killed him. But there's not been mass murders. There's been a lot of people who say that I'm on the ground here and I'm seeing things, but every single source that's actually citing official anything in like videos and photos and stuff, there hasn't been much evidence of that yet. So it's also one of those things where I think this is just a good picture of hysteria before it happens, where we don't know what will happen right now. I would love it if the Taliban take over and there's just a complete peaceful transfer of power. I don't know that will happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's not this absolute slaughter. It's not like it's not like we're abandoning these people in a pit of wolves and the wolves are literally tearing them apart right now. Maybe that will happen. But
I think. Sorry, go.
Well, I was just gonna say maybe that will happen. But this person who tweeted right here knows just as well as I do, and I don't know. So to speak with, if you voted for Biden, Afghanistan's on you. Well, you don't know what the outcome is here, for one thing. And the only thing that we do know is that we are withdrawing in a war that we shouldn't have been in for 20 years. So that's the only for sure thing that we know. And if that's on, people who voted for Biden, then good for them.
Yeah, like you bringing up, like, oh, we're leaving, there's going to be mass slaughter, these people, like, we don't actually know whether that will or will not happen. I obviously hope that it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
At the least amount. But it made me think of H.W. Bush when he was trying to encourage, that sect of Iraqis to rise up against Saddam Hussein, drop the leaflet saying, hey, the U.S. has got your back. We're going to come in there. We're going to help you. Please uprise throughout Saddam Hussein. And then they did, and then we didn't show up, and they got slaughtered. Like, they were all killed. It was massacre, right? No one cared about that. No one cared about that at all. And it's like, obviously, like, I'm hoping that doesn't happen here. But the people that are making this a big deal, like, they weren't really – there was not a big outcry about that, in the late 80s and 90s when this all was going about. And it just kind of speaks to, the very first thing that we showed, which is, like, the war machine propaganda, which is like, oh, it's a humanitarian crisis whenever we pull out. It's not we're doing humanitarian things when we go in.
Yeah.
It's just a big old lie, dude.
Well, and never mind the fact that all of the bombs that we've dropped have been the kind of bloodshed and all the kinds of things that we're worried about in this consequence now. And it's like, let's presume that a bloodshed upon exit is inevitable. Like, let's say that there's no possible peaceful transfer out of there in that, like, of us withdrawing and there being a peaceful transition to the Taliban or whatever. I think it's probably better that we do it earlier rather than later, because that way we're not dropping more bombs, we're not engaging with them more militarily, and increasing that body count. I think it was pointed out, what was interesting is, people were talking about how you're overblowing things, and in the last, 9 months, there haven't been any casualties. And that's because Trump made the agreement with them to leave by a certain date. And then Biden pushed it out a little bit. But he is keeping that agreement. And it's like, if you keep pushing that out, then they're going to go back to fighting in the war with us because we've broken our promise. It's not like, you can say, all right. No one shoot, ceasefire, we'll leave. And then 5 minutes and then be like, see, look, when I was in charge, there was absolutely no bloodshed. Now that you're gone, there's all this blood. It's like, that wouldn't have been in perpetuity if you'd stayed there beyond the agreed time limit, and so you can't look at this, microcosm of the last 9 months over the 20 years we've been there and been like, look, there was no violence here. Things were getting better. And it's like, we got better because we made an agreement that we would leave. So anyway, so it's like, unless you want to stay there for the hundreds of years, like that we've talked about, to have a cultural, and I don't know, like, epistemological awakening in that region of wow, democratic reign and individual liberties are the correct approach, unless you're willing to put our standing military presence there for 20 years, it's probably better that we withdraw, even if there is a violent occurrence, because we don't want to add to that violent occurrence like we've been doing every day for the last 20 years.
I don't think I've got any others on this one. I think that's our last one.
I think
so. Do you have
so.
any other takes on it?
No, but I think you and I would both agree that if you're interested in, history of foreign intervention, particularly Middle East foreign intervention in the U.S., Scott Horton is the man to listen to. He's got it all down pat, and he has the book called Fool's Errand. He's got another one that's also really good. I can't think of it, but
Enough Already.
Enough Already.
And the War on Terrorism.
Yeah, those ones are chock full of stuff. Or you can listen to him on YouTube. He's got plenty of stuff up there. If you're interested in the detailed of the history, it's
he's
fascinating
got a great
stuff.
Yeah, he's got a really great video series. It's kind of like a summary of each chapter of Enough Already. And some of them are like 3 minutes, some of them are like 8 minutes, but they're short. And I shared it on my story when this was all going down, and I actually had a few people message me that they were watching them and they didn't know a lot about this stuff. Like they didn't know that the War on Terror kind of went all the way back to Jimmy Carter and beyond. Right. So that was pretty cool. And antiwar.com retweeted me, so that not
there you
retweeted,
go.
They shared so that kind of made my day.
There
Shout out to them. Well, friends, thanks for hanging out with us tonight, and I guess maybe when you listen to it might be the day. So thanks for just hanging out with us for your 45 minutes. If we said anything that makes you cringe, or if you guys have any questions or want to see any of the resources or things that we shared, be sure to let us know on our socials or at our website. Website is cringepost.com, and our social handle is @cringepostpod, and we'd love to hear from you. So anyways, I'm Britt.
I'm Donald.
And we're signing off. Thanks for hanging.